So we've spoken about triggers before. They are all the ways that you can start your workflow. And today that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. How to actually get that, foot in the door so that you can push through, do some data transformations, do some really cool, kind of integrations with all sorts of services, boom, bada bing, and then have really, really powerful outputs for whatever you're working on. The best way to do things is through a trigger. So we're going to be looking at that. We're going to be trying to understand what triggers are, how to actually use them, and how to set them up in your workflows. By the way, for context, the name is Muzi. I am the Grand Alchemist of the Guild. If you know, you know. I'll keep saying this every single time. If you know, you know. Uh, Basically, my mission is to help like a thousand people who, like me, who wanted to learn automation in the quickest way possible and actually apply those principles to building really cool things that other people need and use every single day. So let's just run through trigger nodes because I think they're very important to understand. Because trigger nodes are literally the activation points for workflows, right? You want to activate them with intent, right? The nice thing about trigger nodes is you don't just trigger your workflow inside. Like you can trigger your workflow just inside n8n, but you can also trigger based on some event that happens outside, which is very, very useful. There's all different ways that we can go through, and again, we're going to see a few of them very, very soon. So trigger nodes are basically just the starting points of your automation. Right? They wait for specific events to happen, and then once triggered, they start the entire workflow. And until it ends or errors, or it sends you back a message saying, "Hey, I'm done. By the way, come check this out." So you use trigger nodes whenever you want your automation to run based on a certain condition. Right? As I said, events are constantly happening. You want to listen for those events, and then you want to start workflows whenever there's like a certain event that you actually want. Think about if you have like a new Shopify order, or if you're in e-commerce or something and you have a new Shopify order. By the way, you could track those maybe like through some kind of PayPal integration or some kind of Stripe integration or something, right? You want to notify maybe yourself of this. You want to notify your team so that they could fulfill that offer, right? You want to like you could do that through a workflow. Basically, you don't have to just like be emailing people every single time. You could have like a templated email that gets sent over with the information of whatever just got bought, so on and so forth. Um, you could do that through just everything can be started just with that trigger. So whenever you have a new email, what you could do, right, is you could label those emails. So you could categorize them based on the content, and then you label them, and then you create some kind of autoresponder if you don't want to respond to them, like if they're the types of emails that you just genuinely do not want to respond to. You could have whenever there's a contact form submitted on your website or something, telling you, hey, I don't understand, I don't understand this or that, and I would like to just get in contact with you. You could have some kind of onboarding workflow where you're like, hey, I understand, this is totally something understandable. Um, I'll get back to you as soon as possible. That just shows them that you care, and they'll be able to take you much, much more seriously just for that. So whenever you could even set triggers up for timing again, like we've spoken about this before, how I have a certain workflow that's running at a certain time, and it creates sort of 10 posts, so 10 X posts, and then it sends them out at a certain time on the day, which is like very useful for me. So you could do similar things. You could send weekly reports. Like at the end of the week, you could just take a bunch of data that you have, sort of present it in a nice way, create a sheet, or create a document through a template, and then just send that out to everyone involved through email. Right? I just listed out the steps that are involved. And it's kind of crazy how if you can list out these discrete steps, you can build workflows around that, which is like so powerful. And like you just once you start thinking in terms of triggers, steps, outputs, and recurrences, you will build really powerful workflows. So yeah, let's just go through the two types of trigger nodes. So there's webhook trigger nodes, which are like messengers for anything that happens in the internet. So say hypothetically you set up a button and you set it up so that every time you click the button, it sends the data of whatever's happening inside, um, to your workflow in the background so that it could do some transformations and data additions into some databases or whatever. Um, Basically, webhooks wait, triggers wait for events. So webhooks are triggers that will wait for data that you're sending through an external app or service, right? They're also polling triggers. So polling triggers, unlike webhooks where something has to happen manually, they send requests every few amounts of minutes or hours or days. So they check apps at certain defined intervals. So you define the interval, and then they're trying to see if anything new has happened, basically. And this is really good for like Google Sheets or RSS feeds or email integrations, right? You hypothetically you want to see if there are any new emails so that you could label them. You only want to get the emails that are worth labeling, so new emails. Any other email is not worth your time. Okay. So now let's check out some of these common nodes. So we've covered these before. I don't want to cover them too much, but just a simple TLDR. Webhook node is super versatile and it works with any service. The cron node, or I guess you would say the schedule trigger, it's time-based triggers, right? You could set a workflow to activate at a certain time on the day. You could set it to activate whenever, it's like every single hour or something. There's email triggers where you can start workflows based on incoming emails. There's Stripe or PayPal triggers where you can time workflows based on payment completion and so on and so forth. There's RSS feeds where you can track new posts, like new blog posts or articles, and you could do sort of like content automation where, like I've said this before, how you could set up a simple workflow that grabs blog content, summarizes it, and then generates a script that you could just simplify in a video format and then send out sort of like an AI daily or a blog, like a news. Whenever there's news, you could just set that up and then send that out, which is very very useful for like people who like the news. Whenever they see those, they engage. Let's look at the. So this is a webhook trigger type, and we've covered this before, but it's very useful. So I guess I might as well cover it again. There's two types. So you have the test URL and the production URL. The test URL is only going to be active if this is inactive, and the production URL is going to be active if you have this as active. So you have to click active on here, and that's only when the production URL will be active. But for if it's inactive, then you have the test URL. And again, you have to understand REST too. So the REST framework, um, you have methods, you have paths, basically endpoints. You have authentication and response types. And yeah, this is only active if it's listening for an event. So in the testing phase, you have to click this manually. You have to say listen for test event, and then test out the event, and then see if it actually grabbed that. So yeah, very useful. These are the polling triggers, so they do things based on time. Um, this is the schedule trigger or the cron trigger. You have some kind of trigger interval. So here we set it as days, and then you have days between triggers. But if you change this to say minutes, then this will change for minutes between triggers. So it's very useful. And again, the larger the time scale, the more sort of settings that you have. So here you can trigger at certain hours, you can trigger at certain minutes. If you set this as hours, you'll have the ability to trigger at certain minutes. And if like the higher the time scales, the more control you have over this. So think about it in terms of months. Now you're triggering at certain days in the month, at certain times in the day, certain minutes in the day, and certain minutes in the hour. I mean, so yeah, very useful and very very extensive. The RSS feed, it constantly watches a feed and then it sends a request like just to check if there's anything new every single whatever poll time that you set. So again, it's the same thing. Every X is very useful because you could set your own kind of like system for measuring things. So if you want to send every 2 minutes instead of just saying every minute, then yeah, this is very useful for that. Um, and you specify the URL of the blog or the RSS feed, just so that you could have sort of data come in. So like if you don't specify the right URL, you won't have the right articles come in. And here's the PayPal trigger. And again, you need credentials. So some triggers need credentials. Again, you've seen a Google Sheets trigger. This uses the Google Sheets credential. Um, you get information from a sheet. So this one gets information for whenever there's a row added or updated, and it'll output the new version of that row, which is very useful. And here's the same. There are a bunch of event names. So whenever there's like you can specify the event type you want. It's like way too many to count. I mean, billing, subscription, updated compliance processes, customer profile, account closing, payment refund. I mean, there's like a lot. Payment capture, there's a lot. And yeah, there's like a lot you could do. I spoke about Stripe before. It also exists. There's like a lot of triggers, and all of them are very powerful. And they allow you to do some really cool things. So just to wrap up, trigger nodes are starting points for automations, right? Automations don't start without triggers. When you're testing things out the first time, you might want to use a manual trigger. Let me just show you what that is. So I just like to go here and just say manual trigger. This is basically whenever you have this, you can click this button to test the workflow and it will run this. If you didn't have this on, it might just disappear or it might just run one of these. If you have multiple triggers on a workflow at one time and you want to test them out, it might be useful to deactivate the other ones before you run that one because it'll start running, I think, the first one that was recorded. So in this case, it will run this one and then run the other ones later on, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, so um, you specify whatever the starting conditions of your workflow is or are, and then you use that starting condition to specify the trigger that you should be using. So if your starting condition is based on time, then you're probably going to be using the schedule trigger. If starting condition is based on something that happens in an app, then you're probably going to be using a trigger for that app. If you can't use a trigger for that app, you'll probably use a combination. So you'll use a schedule, sort of like a cron node, schedule node, and then you'll be sending a request to that app for changes, right? So it's either you're using a trigger or you're using a combination of a trigger and an action, which is very useful. So webhooks, they wait for data from apps, and polling triggers wait for some kind of event to happen from an app, or just some kind of event based on time. That's basically it. I'm sure you're ready to dive deeper. I know I am. So next time we're going to be looking at